All right, we're back. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Excess Exceed. I'm here again with D today. I'm so excited. D, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Howdy, happy to.
And today we are talking about Byakuya from Undernight, our
Yes.
resident creepy, maybe, I don't know, dead spider boy. It's been a while since I've looked at the lore of Undernight. I forget what his deal is, but he's some kind of weird spider.
My understanding is that he is a white tiger who lives in the Animaniacs Tower and shares the performative capabilities of arachnids.
I can't refute that. Uh, that's the best I got. Let's go with it.
There you go.
So, Byakuya, um, hold on. I'm gonna pause everything. I'm gonna stop the the recording's still going. I'm gonna stop the train uh mid
Uh-huh.
roll here. Explain anything that you just said to me, D.
Oh, okay, all right. Um, well, Byako, the white tiger,
Oh my
Wacko,
god.
and Dot,
Yeah.
who can do whatever a spider can.
Well, yeah. So it was multi-layered, your terrible pun.
That's the one that I had ready. I warned you I had one cocked.
He did actually, viewers at home, D actually, prior to starting this recording, literally warned me about a pun he was going to say. It didn't help. I wasn't ready. Um,
I also warned that it
luckily,
would be bad. I did warn that
yeah.
it would be
Oh yeah,
very
no.
bad.
I knew going into it what to expect, and it didn't help. I feel like, luckily, the information of this episode is going to be good, and we have like a good rapport and stuff like that. Because oh man, that was
We just made people suffer through that.
I there's two ways to look at it. Either that was terrible and now we have to work extra hard to make up for it, or that was amazing and the rest of the episode will never compete with it. So depending on
There you
the
go.
listener, you know? All
Yes.
right. So yes, we're learning about the secret fourth Warner sibling, Byakuya, question mark, today. Um Quick disclaimer, I gotta try to recover now. Quick disclaimer before we get started. As always, we're gonna be talking about playing to win on this show. Um, Exceed is not. That's not the only way. God, you messed me
Oh,
up, D. It's so.
let me help.
It's so good.
Exceed,
Help me
Exceed,
out.
Exceed is not a solved game. There's more than one
Yep.
way to play anything. We are not all knowing. We are not perfect creatures. Um, so what we're offering is opinions. Now we might state opinions as fact. I might say things like always do this, never do this. This is strictly correct, strictly incorrect, whatever. That's not gospel truth. Don't take my word for it if you find it suspect. Try it out yourself and try playing differently. Also, ultimately, although we are talking from the perspective of what's the most competitively effective way to play this character to beat down your opponent in every situation, if you don't enjoy the stuff that we talk about, if it doesn't sound exciting to you, don't do it. Play the way that you like to play. Like, have fun. That's the point of this game. Express yourself. Did I miss anything?
No, that's everything. That's absolutely it. Thank you so much, D. So your plan now has been to incapacitate me with a bad pun,
And
uh,
then take over.
and then take over my show. I can't believe you. It's not. I mean, listen. Full disclosure: I stole that disclaimer from you in the first place, so you're
Fair
taking back
point.
what's rightfully yours. You are welcome to host the episode yourself at this point. All right, thank you though.
All right.
Yeah. So let's get into it. Let's
Yeah.
tell me
So,
about Byakuya.
audience, yourself included, Gear, since I'm taking
Yes,
over your show, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
I pulled out on the table before we go over everything else in detail. A character ability and a very situational boost.
Okay.
You've looked at them in the wrong order. This is Byaku's character ability.
This is the character ability, and this
Yes,
is
and
a
this is a very
situational
situational
boost.
boost.
Gotcha.
I
Gotcha.
want to
Okay.
clear that up front because if you look at his ability and think that it's his ability, you're gonna have issues.
Okay.
Uh, he uses the trap mechanic, which is a thing introduced in Undernight. Yeah, there you go. What trap means is just it's a boost that is played onto the board. It's got a little funny icon, that little chain or what's that word? Bear trap? Yeah, bear trap
Yeah.
icon. Um, and it is a continuous boost, so it follows all the continuous boost rules. But the additional rules baggage of being a trap means when you play it, it goes into a space on the board. Whenever you become stunned, it is not. It does not. Blah, 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 let me try this again. If you are not stunned, it is sustained. meaning at the end of a strike, it does not get discarded unless you get stunned. So trap can hypothetically stick out forever if you just never get stunned.
Okay.
So that's some rules baggage I wanted to cover first because there's only 3 characters. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right.
I think
3 characters.
it's Byakuya, Carmine, and I think Landrekia has
Yeah,
one.
yeah. Landrekia has 1. Carmine has 3. Byakuya has 2.
Okay.
And I
And
don't remember another one.
for Byakuya, both of his trap boosts are the same. They're the 2 boosts
Yes.
on his ultras. They're both called web trap. They do the same thing.
Yep.
Okay.
They're on. Yeah. So each ultra has a boost that is the same as the boost in the other ultra. It's this web trap, same text. And
Gotcha.
they're both
Okay.
trap boosts. Yeah,
Okay.
Carmine works the same way, but this is not a Carmine video. So.
Yep.
All right. So I'll now cover what his ability. Sorry, what this card does.
Right.
Action strike. So as an action, you can declare that you're using your ability and strike. If you do that, then you discard a web trap from the opponent's space to gain +2 power and +2 speed. So if you're in, that. Here, I'll get there. There you go. If you're in this situation,
Right.
you can say, I'm doing this, and now you have +2 power, +2 speed, and you're striking with something.
Okay.
That's horrifying. That's
Yeah,
really, really strong.
That's a lot of action compression and a lot of stats.
Yep, it's a bunch of stats. What this really is, though, is text that is kind of added onto 3 of his cards. Because getting in this position, incredibly hard.
Oh, sure. Yeah. My opponent, if I'm playing Byakuya, my opponent is just going to see that this is on my card and be like, all right, well, I just won't stand here.
Yep.
I'll go anywhere else, and I will
Yep.
Take a lot of precautions to avoid going to that one spot.
Exactly. And if you're thinking, well, maybe I can get my opponent into it during a strike, you can't. The text on the web trap says if a player, either player, which we'll get to that later, enters this space during a strike, you end the movement, you discard this, and then you get another effect, which means that you can't just pull them onto it with grasp or whatever. You can't rely on them running into it. They have to be on it outside of a strike, and then it has to be your turn.
Okay.
This is extremely hard to do. He has a few ways to set it up, but that's what makes it kind of a very situational thing.
Okay.
That makes sense?
So when Byakuya puts his web trap down, if I'm fighting Ryu, Byakuya could just put it onto Ryu's space. Like, it doesn't have to be on an unoccupied space the way that, for example, Polar Knight's ice spikes do. But then it's my opponent's turn, and he goes, okay, cool. And then he just moves off of it. And at any point later, if is it during a strike specifically? Yes, during a strike. Okay, so he could conceivably walk back onto it, and then I would be able to get my effect, but it would require like a cooperating opponent to do that.
Right.
Got it.
Right. And we'll cover web traps in great detail when I'm talking about them because they are a significant part of your game plan. This is a significant part because it's a threat. This is useful because the opponent looks at it and goes, "Well, I'm never doing that then."
Right, and then you can play around that.
Yes, and I think that informs way more of Byakuya's play than the idea of actually triggering his shenanigans. Like he does have little card synergies that will let him activate this without the opponent being able to do anything about it. He has those, but they are much less significant overall to how he plays than the fact that the opponent looks at this and goes, "Okay, I'm never doing that."
Gotcha. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And in general, I would say that his traps and his ultras and his ability are less significant to his overall gameplay than this card.
His real character ability, Soul Oath.
Yes, his character ability is 4 copies of Soul's Oath.
Okay, that's right. Oh, yeah, that's worth mentioning. So this card and any other ones,
2 of them, yes.
All of these cards he has 4 copies of. He has a non-standard kit shape.
Yep. If you struggle to remember, it's the sentence.
Right.
How shall I cook you?
How shall I cook
shredded?
you? Minced or shredded? Yeah. Okay. Those are the ones that he has 4 of.
Yep. And these 2 we'll talk about later, but this one, so let's take our first absolute truth that is definitely not an absolute truth, which is this is always a boost. You don't play the stack.
Okay.
That's because of how good this boost is.
Yep.
This is an absurdly good boost. This boost says that you can play Spike at range 1, and it beats Grasp, Focus, Sweep, Cross, Assault, opposing Spike, I guess, Sweep, Block, right? Like range 1 Spike beats everything in the world.
Yep.
Depending on board state, there are situations where that's not strictly true. But like if you're here, then you can do a thing like range 1 dive, before advance 1, before advance 3. Cool, I beat
Right.
your sweep, I beat your focus, whatever.
Right.
And if you're away from the corner, then you have way more freedom where now you can play something like a spike, and you'll be able to retreat against a focus, push against a sweep. If they play a grass, they can put you anywhere they want. It doesn't matter. You have the ability to make sure that you hit them anyway.
Right.
Um,
There's four separate, ways to control your opponent on this boost.
right,
Whichever, you're like not every one of them is going to help with every strike, but one of them probably will.
right. It
Okay.
is generally it is usually like having -1 to +1 range. Like my range is my minimum range is reduced by 1, my maximum range is increased by 1. Is broadly what that often works out to.
Right.
Um,
While also being able to put your opponent into a position where their attack won't hit if they play something with like a narrow range band.
yes.
Okay.
And the second half of this is if you don't need it, you can spend a life to sustain it.
Oh, so you may seal this to advance to do any of those control effects. But all right,
You don't seal it.
I
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I I play spike from here for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And my opponent really does play a sweep. And okay, I don't need this boost. I take one life and this boost is still around for the next strike.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, that's unbelievable.
This is your spider web. This is my you are in my layer. I'm determining the rules. You are not safe from things. It's not the only
Okay.
part of it, but this is part of what to me at least makes Byakuya feel very much like got he's got you locked down and nothing is safe.
Okay.
Um, Now his attacks are not like truly amazing, but this works incredibly well with normals, and there's a few other things that he can do with it that I'll talk about in a minute.
Okay.
But just the fact that you can have it up and then you can keep it up, and then the opponent can tech twice, but hey, you have 4 copies.
You have 4 copies, sure.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Now, I'm going to note that as important as this is and as useful as this is, don't assume that you should always be sustaining this by spending life. Part of the beauty of having 4 copies is if you have another one in your hands, it may well be more worth your time to let one drop and play the other from hand because you're going to reshuffle. Um,
Okay.
like in my experience as Byakuya, you are going to reshuffle because you need to draw cards absurdly, aggressively because you're tied for the largest deck in the game. You have a
You have
36 card
like
deck.
36 cards, yeah.
If I'm wait, one, hold on, am I doing the math right? He has 2 extra copies of 3 cards. Yeah, that's 36. Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Thought so. Anyway, and this, you will want to be drawing through your deck very aggressively to get out the cards you need because also you're something that I consider to be true in general of the Under Night characters, the season 6 cast, is they don't tend to have, most of them, by and large, this is a generalization, don't tend to have a lot of tools for setup on the board. We've had a previous video about Akuma, and I think we did Tinker Knight as well, where we talked about the value of boost play that forces your opponent to do stuff. There's not as much of that going around in Under Night. They are a lot more about collecting a hand that enables specific plays, a hand that lets them throw a bunch of things out that have some sort of, finishing climax that is really good for them.
Yeah.
But so set plays in the hands in my experience in Under Night, which means like you're going to be drawing a lot of cards. You're going to like the change cards action. He has a ridiculous draw boost, which plays into this. Where did we put that card? Here we go.
Wow.
This is
Yeah.
effectively 4 force to draw 8 because
Yeah.
pay the card and then you draw for end of turn. So like this is a tell, right? Like he has this. Yes, he actually needs it.
Right. The plan for him is that he's digging, not just maintaining resources, not just trying to stay ahead of his opponent on card draw. He's looking for specific answers now.
Yes. And that's one of
Okay.
the biggest things that separates him from other defensive characters. Because I consider Byakuya's general playstyle to be defensive. You want to have one of these out, and you want to be holding EXs, and you want your opponents to never ever feel safe striking into you. Meanwhile, what you are doing is you are aggressively drawing into the things that let you actually hurt them.
Okay.
Because you are not going to win just on defensive set play. What you're doing is defensive setups. What you're doing is saying my opponent can't do anything safely into me, and I'm minimizing my losses, and I'm scraping away at my what's the word, incremental value in
Right.
every trade. But my ways to actually kill them, I need to basically draw through my deck maybe twice, because the ways that you're going to kill people are mostly by playing normals.
Okay.
You are not a high damage character. Like, you're not specials and ultras wise. You know, your printed powers are 3, 3, 4, 3, and 3,
Right.
and also 3, and then the 4
Yep.
gauge, which is 6.
Yep.
Like, this is not a lot of power.
Yeah, definitely not.
It
You
is.
have a
Yeah,
lot of like, we don't consider grasp and cross to be particularly high damage, haymaker cards.
exactly. Yeah, like
Right.
the only thing that even breaks that, not counting the ultra over there, is 4.
Right.
Cool. And if you wanted to
Crazy.
know where your power boosts were, it's on that card.
Right.
So, like, this is still only providing 1 power above your normal values most of the time.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, so like you are a featherweight in terms of the damage output. But what you want to do is make the opponent never be able to cleanly win, or at least win heavily. I say cleanly, but I don't necessarily mean that. If your opponent plays sweep, uh, and you play something, if you play any of these, and they don't hit you, um, you probably won that strike because they didn't hit you with sweep.
Right.
Like, anytime you hit them, you're dealing 3 damage. If they hit you for 6, you need to hit them 3 more times to win,
Three
twice
more
more to
times
become even.
to make up for it. Sure. And you
Yeah, like,
have the
it's
ability to do
nasty.
that because you have a couple copies of Soul's Oath, so
Mhm.
you can turn trades into one cleanly won strikes with that.
Right.
Okay.
So Soul's Oath is pivotal in everything you do. It is central to your neutral. Even when you don't have it up, the fact that it exists in your deck is a thing that you, like, both you and your opponent need to be aware of. So you also don't need to have it up all the time. It's perfectly fine for you to be sitting around here and play normal exceed and go like, okay, we're at range 3. My opponent strikes. I have sweep assaults. Like, maybe cross, but probably not in this matchup anyway. But like,
Right.
you can play normally for a while, but then anytime you're in a situation where you're going, okay, I need my opponent to be forced into cooling their heals. I need to make sure that I'm not going to eat some big setup on their ends. Then you can break this out and be remarkably safe, um,
Okay.
and
So so
really annoy people.
this is a diffusal tool then,
Mhm.
as much as it can be a neutral tool or a set play tool. This is something that you can do when your opponent is kind of getting ahead of steam under them and just make them pump the brakes.
Yeah, yeah, and it also works for that, and it's one of those things where if used properly, then which I'll talk about counterplay later. But like, the opponent wants you to have to seal this. So what you want is to force them into plays where you don't have to use it, and then you use
Right.
it when you want to maximize your value, which, as I alluded to previously, is often going to be on a 5 or
On
6 power
normal.
normal.
On
Like,
big normals, sure.
yep, it's your spikes, it's your sweeps, it's your EX sweeps especially. Um, you are an undernight character, so you can play more of those than most people can, which is a nice little
Right.
feature.
Right.
Um, but yes, so very good at those things. So now let's talk about how that plays into the thing that I talked about earlier, which is web traps.
Okay.
These two things together um, mean that you can have a lot of weird shaped board control setups that make people very annoyed and are very inconvenient to them.
Right.
So, for instance, you know, well, sure, whatever. We'll take range 4. You have this, and your opponent goes, okay, well, now you can hit me with assault or spike or sweep. That's a pain. Um, so they decide to go into range 1 because they're holding, I don't know why, whatever. Like, this
Whatever they
situation,
have.
that's not even safe, right? They have to be here to be safe
Right.
against for their focus to be safe, and even then, it
Right.
still loses to the dive.
Right.
But whatever it is, they decide like, okay, I'm going to do whatever I can to make this not as worrying to me. Um, at which point you can do this.
And then say, get out of here.
Yeah, and they go, okay, well, now I have to stun you, I guess, right? Because what they can't do is they can't have a strike where they pass turn to you, and now they're on this,
Right. And now you
unless
blow them
yeah,
up.
unless they stun you. If they stun you, then it's fine. But what they can't have happen is like, you get to initiate with this thing. That's a problem.
Right.
Um, or at least they can. They certainly don't want it though. And so that's the shape a lot of neutral exchanges take, is that one or the other of these is the thing that you plop down, and the opponent goes, oh, I can't actually, like, play against your neutral now. What happens?
Okay.
Um, so you can, this is a forcing play. The opponent goes, oh, you're on this. I have to get off of it. So I'll move one way or the other. And then you can do this. And now they have massive problems. Let me also point out the way that these interact. This says if a player enters this space during a strike in the player's movement, discard this and choose one. Push one, pull one, or gain advantage.
Right.
So at this range, for example, I can, as Byakuya, play Grasp. I'm faster than you. As a before effect, I'm going to push you, and then I'm going to push you some more. And now your dive and assaults and sweep and spike are completely useless.
Right.
Right? I have this. I can just say I'm faster than you because I'm faster than you. I control the board because I control the board. I'm safe against anything you throw.
And all of this stuff when you're making these calls about where to move your opponent or where to put them, this is post reveal. You're option selecting them.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Like you should already have the information at that point in time.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so one of these being up is a way that you make the opponent have to move into a position where you are then contesting neutral even more strongly than they are.
Okay.
It's there's a lot of different situations where it's useful, and I don't think it's reasonable to delineate everything. But that's the broad strokes of what you do with this thing.
Even just talking about it in terms of one specific matchup, there are so many board states where this is beneficial, but maybe not beneficial to use it. Like it sounds like learning how to use these the limited copies you have of a almost a couple of win the strike buttons or neutral control buttons, and when not to use them is an important part of this. Like when to save them for when they matter.
Yeah, knowing when not to use Soul's Oath is probably the most important skill you can learn as Byakuya. Because using this is generally I have found a way to win this strike. Cool. Managing to stay ahead and conserving it is what gives you enough value to win the game.
Okay.
Because winning individual strikes, as noted, is not probably going to be a lot of value. It's not going to be a lot of damage.
Unless you're, as you said at the beginning here, unless you're crafting a hand where you have a number of payouts that are going to let you hit for more than 3 or 4 and actually make some plays.
Yeah, so you like things like Superior combined with any of these 3 normals. You can play Cross, but you have a lot of ways to be faster than people. I tend to think what you need is the damage, so I like to play a lot of EX sweeps and a lot of regular old spikes that can also hit you at ranges 1 and 4, because why not? Like these are very, very good cards to have around with this thing up.
Right.
Like that's what your payouts look like. They look like normals. And you will need to draw through your deck to see all of them reliably.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so here's the other thing where the other shape of starting this as a forcing play is that this is a preventative play, where you can say, I don't want you to come into range 1 with run, you're Zangy for something, like, let's just put this here. Now, you'll do a bunch of things, but what you won't do is give me this turn.
Right.
And by the way, if your opponent does give you this turn, you need to know how to capitalize so that it's not wasted. And usually what I would say is you play +2 power, +2 speed sweep.
Okay.
Their way out of this is to play Cross. You beat everything up.
And if they just ran in, if they're a season 1 through 5 character, they just ran in, you better hope that they better hope that they have the other copy. And clearly they wanted to be here in the first place.
Yeah, like if they were willing to do this, then unless they are specifically baiting your payout, then yeah, they are not likely to want to back out to range again.
Right. And if you happen to have Soul's Oath in play as well, even that isn't enough.
Yes. At this point, if you manage to initiate with this sweep, then you win. Like the opponent has to have very specific EX attacks to do things about that.
Right. Basically just like EX dive to get it to get the dodge effect, right? I think is
that's among normals, that's the one.
Like a character specific thing. Otherwise you just lose the strike hard.
Yep. But yeah, so you can use this to set up in advance. You can use it to force the opponent out of position. These are the situations where you'll play it from hands. There are other ways to play this, which that's where we'll get into the combos and the synergies and shenanigans. Let me note one other thing about this, specifically about these interactions. You can put it behind you, which is a way of, I now have access to this with Soul's Oath. Specifically, you want to do this after the Soul's Oath is out. With Soul's Oath out, you put this behind you, and you go, okay, now I have a before effect that says I can retreat 1 and push 1. and you're out of range of anything
Oh,
I want.
if a
A
player,
player.
it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be my opponent.
It
Okay,
does
so
not.
I can just say I'm gonna like perch in my web for a second and just shove you away or gain advantage off of it or something.
Yep. Now you have to move on to it for that, but that's if you have Soul's Oath, that's trivial.
Right.
Um, this also creates situation, or this also lets you create situations where even without Soul's Oath, you can do things like put it here and have access to an advantage dive, or
Hmm.
let's see, where's that one thing? Oh yeah, yeah, in front of you, you can hit with this attack, and the after will cause you to advance, and then you stop here and you decide to retreat so that you don't get hit by sweep. Right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's some
You
shenanigans here.
you sort of springboard off of it. I honestly the way that you're describing some of these
Or wait,
interactions,
hold on. I'm this. You don't retreat. You don't retreat. You push.
you
That
push. I see. Okay.
I misspoke. Mhm.
The way that you're describing some of the stuff, he sounds like the way that people play somebody like Cammy or even Bang, like
Oh yeah,
a
he's a
lot
ninja.
of dodging sort of ninja style effects to and that also fits in with like the very low damage, like that kind of really evasive, frustrating, hard to hit character.
Yep.
But his is more control oriented and theirs is more kind of movement or outright dodge effect oriented, it seems like.
Yes. Yeah. He somewhat amusingly has I think the only thing in the game that gives the opponent a dodge effect. I could be wrong about that. Here
Oh
you go.
yeah, his
Got you.
if you have speed 4 or lower.
Yeah. So this is the thing that says, hey, if you have a speed 5 or higher, you probably don't have much guard. So if you have speed 5 or higher, I will stun you.
Right.
And it's speed 8 by itself, which means it's extremely hard to just outspeed with a card,
Right.
right? This is great for, well, as the name implies, catching people out.
Yeah,
Um, catch them by
it
surprise.
it's like a lot of above curve options, it seems like it'd be a good defensive tool, but you
Mhm.
at least need to know that your opponent isn't initiating with something very slow into you.
Right. Yeah. The thing that's really dangerous about it is that the loss case on it is really, really bad. My general advice on Katyu: never let 2 copies drop. You want your opponent to be afraid of this at all times.
Okay.
Well, maybe not. They may or not be afraid of it. That depends on the player. You want them to be aware of it. You want them to always know that if they try to throw, something like a light dive or a light assault, they can just get popped.
Right.
Um, like the EX assault still loses to this. One of
Right.
my
Right.
favorite EXs just get screwed. Because it doesn't have damage to stun.
Right.
You
Right.
usually should not initiate with this, despite the advantage on it, unless you are extremely confident that you're going to hit. Because initiating with this and it being a clean whiff, and now it's your opponent's turn, it's horrific. Like it's an
Right.
awful, awful, awful loss.
And a lot of slow attacks are great defensive tools. So
Right,
your
and
opponent,
generally, here's the thing. If I sorry, let me make this explicit. The reason this loss case is so bad is because the things that you don't get to hit are the things that would outtrade you by twice as much anyway.
right? Yeah.
Right?
Now instead of sweep beating you by 3, it's beating you by 6, and you don't get a gauge.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's pretty devastating. Your opponent would pay quite a bit for that to happen.
Yep. It
Okay.
is giving them the clean hits when they were willing to accept a positive trade, and that is
Right.
super, super dangerous.
And you've lost one of your call out cards in the process.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
so my main use case for this is I want at least one copy to be available to me so my opponent has to worry about it. And if I'm ever actually playing it, it's because I have some sort of jank involving these two things. Because speed 8, I control the board, is pretty cool.
Oh, speed 8 in and interacting with your various before effects or your various, combo into from a before effect with your web
Yeah.
trap. Okay.
Like if we're standing here at range 3 and I have the web trap behind me, Soul's Oath up, and I play this thing, cool. I stun assaults. If you play dive, then I will retreat and shove you away. Or actually, wait,
Right.
sorry, dive. Uh, I would probably do that. I have other options. I could just advance, but you're going to land on the web trap anyway.
Right.
Uh, like if you play sweep, then I can push you away and keep my web trap because this sustains if I don't get stunned.
Right.
Um, like I have a million tools. And so that's when I'll generally play caught you is when I just want to have one card that is faster than anything my opponent can do. It's the example I gave earlier of I play Grasp at range 4 faster, but on a card that could hypothetically hit.
Right.
I don't trust this thing to actually hit a lot of the time, just because of how bad the case is when it doesn't.
But otherwise, you would just play it on defense when you have a good read, or this is you're saying this is specifically when you initiate with it is when you have a setup.
um, no, I use it on defense when I have a setup. I'm saying I
I
tend
see.
not to initiate with it because of how bad the lost case is.
I get you.
It is generally a tool to counter like an EX that you're confident the opponent is playing that like they throw EX Assault and they don't have access to something like EX Sweep, and you go, oh, cool. This beats EX Assault and EX Dive and EX Cross. Neat. I'll beat, most of the things that are reasonable to play here.
Right.
It characters with speed boosts, so anyone in season 1 through 5, right? They have +2 speed, and you go, okay, cool. Unless they play +2 speed Sweep or Focus, I'll hit them.
Right.
And your lost case gets a lot better for you in
Right.
that
And
situation.
that involves them sort of making a specific call out based on this card. So they might be playing well, you're making them play a mix up rather than making them play a sure thing now.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Because normally the opponent's like, all right, I have +2 speed and I want to throw assaults to guarantee a hit, right? And against this, it doesn't guarantee a hit. It's not, speed 7
Right.
assault is not fast enough.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, so each of these components, right? This as just as threats, just not even thinking about how you use them, but each of these introduces something that slices away at what your opponent can do safely that they know will work.
Okay.
And so as you put up Soul's Oath or a trap in a specific location, or just have access to this in your kits, right? The opponent goes, oh, I can't rely on like not being in range of things. I can't rely on the board not being overwritten in a couple minutes. I can't rely on fast things working, which they generally
Right.
do.
Right. And then in combination, when you've cultivated a couple of these things happening at once and you've maintained the threat of caught you, now there's a whole lot of things that they can't
Yeah,
guarantee or they have to worry about.
it turns from like the space of what you can do, right? I've been slashing away at it,
Right.
and then eventually it's going to narrow down until the things that you can do are either non-existent or
It
there's a thing, and I'll play what beats it, right? So
it's almost like some kind of web. D.
funny how that.
I can't help but
Hmm.
notice that what you've drawn here
Hmm.
seems to resemble a web.
Hmm.
That's crazy.
What a
What a
strange
strange
coincidence.
coincidence. Exactly.
Yeah. Hmm. About that.
Interesting. Okay.
Uh, but yeah, that's kind of how I see his like defensive utility. He's got a bunch of it, and but what it does is generally control what the opponent's reliable options are.
Right.
He's not going to outstat you. He's not really going. Well, I know he's not really going to outmaneuver you per se. What he's going to try to do is outset up you, and he does it without stats, which is like one of the most peculiar things you can do is to say that I'm a setup character who does not have stats.
Who
Uh,
doesn't who just does it through board control instead. Yeah.
yep.
Interesting.
So
And
his stat
I
is position, I guess. I don't know.
yeah, his stat is annoyance. So you already mentioned that Soul's Oath is about as close to a sure thing you should always boost with this rather than play it as an attack as
Uh-huh.
it can get. And the excuse me, the web trap, you mentioned that there's a couple other ways other than boosting it to get it into play that we'll probably go into.
Mhm.
With Caught You, is that another situation where most of the time you're playing this as an attack for its neutral control and threat, or is it a situation where is this one a little bit less fundamental to his game plan than
Less
Soul's
fundamental.
Oath and the Web Trap? Okay,
This is a card I'll happily pay 1 copy as force. The important thing about this is that 1 copy remains.
okay,
Um, like, and I'm careful with that. Where you don't want to be 100% predictable in any case. So if my opponent knows I'm never playing it, it's not useful to me. I still am willing to play 1 copy. What I'm trusting if I do that, or my second copy, what I'm trusting if I do that is I'm about to reshuffle because I've gone
right,
through my deck because that's what I'm doing with most of my time is
right,
just drawing through cards.
right.
Um, I think it might be no, Byakuya might be the character for the character with whom I've taken the second most change cards per game action on average. Um, like I do a lot of change cards actions with Byakuya.
You're just filtering like crazy for your answers.
Yep, like I've definitely had
Or
Byakuya games where it's most of my turns.
I should probably say
Or
that differently because what you're
you
what
said
you just
answers. Sorry.
answers
Yeah,
exactly
I'm not
threats.
filtering for
You're
answers. I have
yeah
answers. I'm
here
filtering for
here
questions.
yeah here's your answers. You're looking for the things that are actually going to deal damage to your opponent rather than solve the problem that they're presenting you. You have those.
Right. But ideally, I mean,
Gotcha.
if I don't have these, then I'm changing cards even more aggressively because I need
Right
to
to
have at least
to
something.
get them. But now that you have these, you put these down, and now you have turns that will let you. You have a free turn where you can change cards because in the same way that I'm okay to prep sometimes when I'm in this board state if I'm a different character and I have a focus down or I have a focus
Mhm.
in my hand and
And
I'm
available, yeah.
ready. Yeah,
Yeah,
if
you're
they
like,
punch
okay,
me,
this
I'm
is
like,
a
yeah,
exactly. You
this
you
is a
create a position where you're defensively fortified.
yeah,
Like you're like, I'm
this is a
comfortable.
situation where I'm comfortable enough to take a low tempo action because I don't really want to move too badly. This is Byakuya does that by having access or the sort of actively using these tools, and then my opponent has to stop, and then you go, all right, cool, uh, change cards, change
Mhm.
cards, change cards until you get your bullets.
Yep. And if
Okay,
your opponent doesn't stop, that's where the thing that I alluded to before of you need to be able to develop the skill of I'm playing without consuming my soul's oath or my traps. Where you go, my opponent is still in my face aggressing, even though I'm telling them they can't do it safely.
right,
Okay, they're probably committing something that's not very expensive to that because they're just trying to make me do things to spin my setup in a way that's not really going to hurt them very badly in the long run, right? They're not going to throw an
right,
ultra when they see this setup.
right,
Um, they're like generally speaking because they go, oh well, whatever you can do a thing that is guaranteed to beat any play I make here, so I'm going to make a play here that I don't mind you beating. And so you then can use that to go, okay, what do I do that's safe against all the things that they don't mind me beating, right? And that's yeah,
that still preserves your setup.
exactly.
I
Yeah,
see.
because what you want is, like you don't want to always sustain this, and you don't want to always seal it, and that's where Byakuya is hard. I probably should have mentioned this earlier. I think Byakuya is actually very very hard to play.
Right,
The reason I picked him up was because I observed nobody else playing him successfully and went,
right.
that looks interesting. Let me try that.
Yeah, that sounds like a D kind of motivation to me.
Yep. He was not a character that appealed to me when I first glanced over the kit. I was like, look, skinny guy, not a grappler. Why do I care? But
Right,
uh, but then nobody else seemed to be able to figure him out. At least at first. Not saying that is still the case, but it made me go, all right, let's cram a few, several dozen Byakuya games until I start to figure out what the heck I can do with this guy.
right,
Um, uh, but yeah, so he's hard, and part of the reason he's hard is because being a heavily defensive character who's reliant on a few answers instead of just kind of throwing down stats and saying "Have a good day" means that you need to know every matchup. Like
right.
you go, okay, does my opponent have a thing that says this is not a problem for them? Does my opponent have a thing that says this is not a problem for them? Spoilers, they don't. But hypothetically,
Right,
they could have 2 extra copies of tech, which means, oh, now my first 4 Souls Oaths actually don't do anything.
right,
Um, maybe they have a supply of stat boosts or printed defenses. Oh yeah, there you go, Waldstein, right? He has 1 armor, 2 guard in every special. You go, oh,
that's
I can't
that's
stun
not
you.
a right. That's not enough for caught you to actually matter.
Yeah, it's like your printed stats don't stun Waldstein, generally
Right,
speaking.
right,
You need to be aware of that,
right.
and that's
So
that's the case all across the board. Like every
so
character, you're gonna have to pay attention to.
I guess the way that I would put that is like stats on a stat boosts, for example, hit breakpoints, and that's why they're strong. This
Mm,
kind of set play doesn't hit a breakpoint. It's not. It's not a universal answer. It's an answer that is based on what your opponent can throw. It's just that it's a really, really strong answer to most of what your opponent can throw. So
yes,
in most cases, you don't really need to care about the exact nuances of what your opponent can do until you suddenly do.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like, and that's especially true of Soul's Oath, which is kind of the quintessence of all of this, which is yeah, this probably lets you play a card that works against anything in the world.
Right.
Um, But what you want to do is what you want from this is that it will get you enough value that it's actually worth sealing or worth spending to sustain, for example, where you go, okay,
Right.
I want to hit with something chunky. I don't want to play this and then null the strike. And then if I do that 3 times, I've lost 3 life for no reason.
Right.
Like, if I'm assuming I'm not
And
sealing it.
that's the value of of probably a strike. If you've lost 3 life, you've like they haven't
Yeah.
gotten their gauge, but they've hurt you over the
Yeah.
course of a couple turns.
Like, yes, like that's generally been what my rule of thumb is with this boost is to go, oh, I'm sustaining it for the 3rd time. I should instead be playing the other copy. Like, I don't, if I'm sustaining this more than twice, then I'm losing so much life on it. Have I actually gotten the value I needed off of it?
Right.
Because it's
You
perfectly
probably
fine
should
to
be. You
let
can
it
just
go to discard.
pay out instead. Yeah.
Yeah, like I should pay out with something like sweep or spike, or I should let this fall into my discard pile and then play the other copy from hands, just allowing that to be, a different cost where I spend a turn to play it instead of a life.
Got it.
By the way, if you're ever tempted to have 2 Souls Oaths in play, let me know what you found that required that. I've never had that actually be a thing that I needed.
One is usually enough.
Yep, I think I threatened it once for fun. Like I put the second one in play, but I used one and let the other drop. Like I did not actually intend to use it. It was just me discarding in advance.
Right.
Um, I can't imagine you needing 2 Souls Oaths in, yeah, virtually any situation.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure we could engineer one with a lot of boosts on your opponent's side that let them, a lot of before close movement or something like that. But
Yeah, there's
we
probably ways to make that reasonable.
yeah.
It's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, but in real game states, you can get away with just one.
Yep.
Okay, makes
All right.
sense. So these are kind of
Mhm.
my neutral tools and my neutral buttons. Um,
Yep.
and my payouts tend to be my normals.
Yeah.
Um, what next?
Yep.
Where do we
Yeah.
want to
So
go from here?
let me talk about the other defensive things you need to know. Um, what are the stats on this card?
So 137 hit advance 3.
That is a very good guess. It is in fact a 148 with 1 armor and 1 guard.
Okay,
You have 2
because you're
copies of
EXing
this.
because you're EXing it.
Correct.
Okay.
So you have 2 copies of EX Minced is what I'm getting at, right?
Yes.
Um, you don't really have 4 copies of Minced. At least you probably don't, because Minced is not a very good card to play.
Right.
Um, it is like Grasp, except it is mostly worse than Grasp. It manages to lose to Spike at range 1. It does beat Focus at range 1 most of the time. That's kind of nice. But it
Right.
loses to Sweep unless you have a web trap set up at exactly this board state.
To get into it and then push
Yeah,
him away.
so that
Okay.
you land on it and then you push them,
Right.
which you, yeah, would generally prefer not to do. If you especially if you're initiating. If you're initiating, then you'd like to have advantage off this. You want to use the other side of this defensively. But
Right.
anyway, so Minced is mostly I have a speed 8 attack in my kit that isn't caught you. Like a speed 8 attack that actually is just a speed 8 attack. It's going to hit you. It works. It's
Right.
not a speed 8 attack that doesn't hit sweep. It's a,
Yeah,
yeah,
there's no contingent, there's no asterisk on this. It's just it hits. It's fast.
yeah. Now the other side of this is you may not play 2 copies of EX Minced, because it's actually a pretty solid boost. You may just play 1 EX Minced and then boost this twice, for example.
Okay.
This is a move 1, draw 1 boost most of the time. Which is, hey, that's a little better than a move action, right?
Right.
You're paying, you're quote unquote paying a card because you're boosting this, so it goes away from your hands, but it refunds itself, so it's 1 better than a move action. So this is another footsie's tool, another neutral tool, right? The boost,
Right.
excuse me.
The
And then
boosters. Yeah.
this is another defensive tool where having another reversal, that is to say, an above curve defensive option, something that is faster than the speed curve that you can play on defense that you know will work, and doesn't have any asterisks on it, makes
Right.
EX Minced a really useful thing to have.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. It's also like, especially because, well, if you have Soul's Oath, then this means you also have a range 2 speed 8 attack,
Yeah.
right?
It's like a super DP at that point.
Yeah, because of how this makes everything silly.
Right.
But yeah, so Minced is, hey, I have an extra reversal in my kit. It takes 2 cards from my hands, and then this is, I have a slightly better move action a lot of the time, and that's pretty useful because you care about drawing cards. Drawing cards
Right.
good.
Sure.
Uh,
What about the synergy with the predator boost?
Yeah, that is the drawback to this boost. Is that sometimes it's hard to play. Yeah. So, oh yeah, sorry. Let me clarify this. These two boosts each have a drawback, which is that if the other copy is in play, you may be forced to strike. This tends to be bad for you, which is why I'm
Okay.
phrasing it the way I am. Right? It looks
Right.
like a beneficial writer. I think it usually is not.
Okay.
It can be. Specifically, when it's good is usually if you're playing this one second and saying, "Oh yes, I actually wanted to move one and draw a card and strike."
And strike with +1 power from the boost I already put
Yes,
down.
yes, because that's the one that says I'm changing the board states now, and therefore I'm striking in a position that's advantageous to me when I wasn't in one a moment ago. So this is the one that lets you
Right.
say move one and strike is actually solid. Like that's
Right.
the one that I would play second if you are going to do this combo.
Okay.
Just +1 power and strike on most of your stuff is not going to hit any breakpoints that matter.
Sure.
Um,
Because you're a low damage kit.
yeah, like
Okay.
you are struggling to hit power values that matter, and then this is also not a thing that stacks with any other actions. So you can't like do this and then use your character ability if you manage to be in that setup somehow.
Okay.
Because it causes a strike. It doesn't let you take another action or anything. But yeah, the when I'm going to use this deliberate or like when I'm going to use this combo synergy rather is starting with this and then deciding that I need this. Most of the time, what I will end up doing is if I have this in play, I'm happier to play the second predator, and now I have a +2 power that's drew me extra cards over time. Like I got a slower fierce that also drew some cards.
Right.
Fierce being the +2 power boost from seasons 1 through 5.
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
Okay.
but yeah, so like I like playing this boost as I'm taking a change cards action that also puts a little power on the board, which I kind of desperately need all the time.
Yeah, right.
Um,
And because you have 4 copies of this, you're okay with playing those boosts back to back
yeah,
to make a sort of makeshift fierce if you need to.
exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha.
This attack is also not an attack I generally like care about playing because stat wise it's very very underwhelming. Like Minced has the property of its reversal, and then that's basically it as far as useful things. This kind of has that property. It's reversal at range 4 exactly.
Right.
Because EX this is printed or not printed. Sorry, EX this is speed 5.
Right.
Because +1 and then this text on here. Um, so it's on curve at 3, so it's not all that good defensively. It's not that reliable defensively. Um, but at 4, it is above curve. It's only 1 point above curve, and there's a decent number of fast fireballs where at range 4 they're going to be hitting at speed 5 or greater, and they will deal more than 2 damage, which will stun your EX attack. So I consider this pretty unreliable, offense and defense. Offensively, it's not a true projectile because it does not beat sweep ever.
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
you move into its range.
Yep. The after effect on this means that if you don't have what's it called, web trap supporting you in a specific setup, then you are going to end up in range of your opponent's counterattack, and you are
Right.
probably going even on damage, which if you initiated, really really sucks.
Sure. Sure.
Uh,
Sure. Okay. So
yeah.
generally this is a boost. This is a good EX deck or a good boost.
Yep.
This is a boost. I'm sorry, this is an attack.
This is a
We haven't.
this is a threat. This is
Yeah.
this is a complicated card, right? This is one where it's I never want the threat of it to leave my opponent's minds, but I'm not actually I'm not all that I don't trust this attack very much, despite
Right.
its importance.
But
Um,
they need to know that you're willing to play it.
yes, and then the
Right.
thing about the boost is, um, it's just retreat up to 3. The other text in this generally does not matter, because what this says is if it I want the opponent to not initiate on their next
Right.
turn. Um,
Right.
which most people are going to go, okay, I'll do something else useful, right? I'll
Yeah.
just move in 3, or I'll
Right.
draw some card or whatever.
And
Whereas
you also have plenty of ways to honestly even this to make your opponent not want to strike into you on their turn anyway.
exactly right, like you're the
Okay.
kind of character that should be saying most of the time, I want to win the strikes my opponent initiates, and then I want to very very seldom win or no, and then I want to very very seldom initiate strikes, but when I do, I want to win those really really cleanly.
Okay.
Um, and so saying, my opponent's not initiating this turn is just I took a move action, which is fine. Like that's not a bad thing. Having a retreat up to 3 boost is nice. Um, but given the value of this card, I usually don't end up playing that. Yeah, like it's also rare for me to need to be that much farther away. Like I'm generally happy to be at ranges 1 to 4.
Okay.
And if I'm beyond that, I'm certainly not retreating.
Right. Sure.
Mhm.
That
But
makes
yeah,
sense.
so that's yeah. This is a weird card in that it is a card that's really really important that you have, and is also a card you want to be very very careful when you play.
Right.
Um,
Okay. But and both of those things together, combined with the sort of lackluster effect of the boost, means that you need to weigh the threat you're giving up by dropping one of these cards with
yeah,
the benefit you're getting. Okay.
yeah. Like I mentioned earlier that I'm happy to throw this as force. Like I'm happy to let the one copy of this drop. That is true.
Right.
I also have to be very careful because then I only have one copy, and I need to make sure that I'm maintaining that threat over my opponent.
Sure. No,
Um,
that makes sense.
yep. All right. There is a fifth special, and that will segue us nicely, I think, into some of your sillier things.
Okay.
All right. Um, let's the boost first. I've alluded to this boost already, or not alluded to. I directly pointed at it. I said this is a boost.
Yep.
Philocerata, spider teeth essentially.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, this or is teeth active? Well, whatever. Anyway, spider parts. This is a really big change cards action, right? You're paying 3, actually 4, to draw 7 plus in a turn.
Well, yeah,
Um,
actually 8. Okay.
yeah, you may notice, which he's a spider. Of course, it's 8. Anyway, you may notice that you will always be discarding for end of turn after this because you
Yes.
draw 7, you draw for end of turn, you're at 8 cards, you discard down to 7.
Right.
Um, if you are the kind of person who always feels bad for having to discard because you drew over, you will have a hard time playing Byakuya.
Right.
Like you need to be throwing cards away, going through your deck very quickly, and gathering the most useful stuff you can into your hand and letting everything else fall into the garbage, uh, to get enough damage to kill the opponent.
Okay. And
Um,
obviously, judging what those things are for the matchup is the skill testing part.
Right. I mean, it's broadly going to be like I've mentioned the stuff you like the best. I should mention Focus as well. I didn't because I didn't, but yeah, Focus is a good card. Sweep and Spike are really good cards for this
Yep.
character, and then
Yep.
Cross and Superior are both really useful.
Okay.
And then you start to get into, do I need Grasp? I don't know. I've got Minced,
Right.
like, and Grasp is often Respect or a card you can throw away because you have this other fast thing over here. You don't actually need Grasp itself.
Right. Right.
And then these are like very very they're just kind of what they are for anybody else. You don't especially care about Assault or especially care about Dive most of the time in my experience.
Right. Barring
Uh,
some Souls Oath jank that you mentioned with Dive, or
yeah,
some yeah, and that even that required like a very very specific corner setup with your
yes,
web trap. Yeah.
yeah. Like Soul's Oath means that Assault can be above curve, Dive can like beat everything at range 4, assuming that the opponent didn't outspeed it.
Right.
These are useful properties, but they're not like they're not necessarily better than the properties you would have of combining those same tools with these other cards.
Sure. Sure.
Um, of course, reading is excellent. This is a boost you like because, well, you like to diffuse a bunch of opponent things. They're going to be tending to try to curate stuff that they can use to punch through your defenses, which means that watch their discards, pay attention to what normals they still have, try to snipe their own reading if they have one. If they're a
Mhm.
season 7 character, then you can try to snipe something else. Um, but like, reading is good for you because you are kind of a controlly defensive character.
Right.
Um, like it's good for those reasons. Tech hit is tech hit. Sometimes you need it. This is not really different from you than it is for anyone else. Block is
Right.
block. It's not going to be a lot of value, but you know, it means
Sometimes
you're
you
not
need
going to
it.
get killed. Yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes you need it.
But other
Uh,
times, hopefully most of the time, this can be force for you to go digging.
yeah, usually this is going to be force slash thrown away at the end of the turn. Um, Now coming back to Chilicerata,
Yes.
um, I've praised this for its value. That said, I actually don't play it super often because this attack is deceptively good. This is probably his strongest special.
Okay.
Unless you count the one in Soul's Oath, but Soul's Oath doesn't have an attack on it, so I don't count it. Anyway.
So yeah,
Uh,
we're literally not even going to talk about that card. I think it's actually probably a good idea, like to sort of break tradition here and literally not talk about how shall I cook you.
I have to talk about it to explain the rules behind it because the text on it is a little confusing. So I
Oh
will come
sure,
back
okay,
to how shall I cook you, but only for that reason.
gotcha, gotcha.
Um, not for strategy reason. All right. The reason this card is so good is because it lets you chain into this situational boost. Um, so after you may play an ultra boost from your hands. That's web trap.
Yep.
Uh, from Gaedra hands. Mostly that means hand. if you do gain advantage. So advantage, it's your turn. Hey, this doesn't say unoccupied space.
Right. I put it
Cool.
underneath my
I
opponent.
put it
Now
on
it's my
you.
turn.
My turn.
I
Strike. Let's
immediately
go.
strike with +2 power,
Yeah,
+2 speed.
you got it. Exactly.
Okay.
That is the thing to do. The problem with that is doing it and then not getting stunned. Because if you play this and the opponent plays sweep, all right, cool. You're well, hold on. Let's take our worst case here. I hit over here. You played sweep. Well, I could decide to pull you and put the web trap on you, and then I get hit by sweep, and then I'm stunned, which means this is actually gone.
Right.
It's not sustained.
Right.
So what I end up having to do is I push you, and then I could do this, but the only way for me to hit you at range 5 on the next strike is to play this. So unless I have exactly this, which still doesn't stun another sweep if you happen to have one. Anyway,
Right.
like this is much less exciting. So the
Right.
tricky part to this is finding situations to play this in where you can land it and then you're not risking a counterattack and the opponent's in range 1 to 3, because those are the ranges where this becomes really, really devastating. I like to see it when they play a focus at range 4, for example, because then they stay there and now I can play a dive that has 7 power and they just played a focus. That's a really good situation. But very often,
sometimes this push or pull one on I'll plant it somewhere over here is what you're saying is that you would sort of rather that not be there.
it very much depends, because usually you do want it. It's the if you're playing this on curve, exactly at range 4,
Right.
it's very, very hard for both parts of this card to be useful. The hit means you're not going to get hit by sweep. That's good.
Right.
But
Except
you
then you need to pull them in, and then you would get. I see what you mean. Okay.
yeah, like
Yes.
you're not going to pull them in and get hit by sweep, because that completely destroys the value of the after. Well, not completely. I guess you have advantage, but what you actually do here, by the way, if you're at range 4, you play this and they play sweep, is you push, and then as an after, you put this either in front of you or behind you, because that way you do gain advantage, and now you have a web trap that's set up for defensive utility, as we covered before.
Yes.
You're not doing it for your shenanigan, which makes you sad, but you are not getting hit by sweep, which makes you happy.
Right.
Getting hit by sweep is a bad time.
And you have something that will help you win the next strike, or at least mitigate what they're doing, so it's not a horrible loss case either.
Right.
Gotcha.
Now, the ways when this card really shines is when you can play it with one of there you go. Play it with this active, or play it under curve.
Okay.
Because
when it's a mid speed, sure.
yeah, as a mid speed at range 3, this, as you'd expect from mid speed, beats anything slower than it, but also has the property of you can now actually have them at a useful range with advantage, where
Right.
your worst case is that they are at range 4 and you are hitting them with a speed 6 power 7 dive, which is pretty
Right.
good.
Yeah.
Or what you also like to do is play the other copy at range 4, and now you have a speed 6 power 5, and it chains into another advantage. That requires a fairly specific hand, though, because you have to have
Right.
actually
Yeah.
held 2 ultras and 2 of this.
You would need another web trap. Right.
Yeah. But yeah, so generally you're gonna like this shines when you can play it at range 3 and get full value out of it because the opponent did not defend on curve. Or when you have this in play, because this means, like Soul's Oath, you generally don't combine with the attack. You're going to pay a life to say that the next strike is very, very stupid. Because at range 4, yeah. So I can end up in this situation, and I'm still threatening my dive from range 5.
Your big 7 damage dive, or your
Yes.
okay.
Or if I was
And
able to end up create a different position, then I can do much, much stronger things, but that's much rarer.
Right. Sure. But because the I'll plant it somewhere over here already has the push or pull 1, Soul's Oath, obviously, like if you needed to push or pull 2 in order to dodge something that's relevant, but you were already saying that you probably don't need 2 Soul's Oaths. So
Yeah.
this is a threat for later. This is doing the job of Soul's Oath for the strike.
Yeah, if you have Soul's Oath and you play Outplanted, it's probably not because you wanted to use Soul's Oath's effect. It's probably because you wanted to have Soul's Oath the next strike.
Right, and that next strike now has the web trap boost probably underneath your opponent.
Ideally,
Cool.
If you didn't just get pops and stuns, because this is not all that reliable.
Right. Okay.
If you want this to be more reliable, by the way, EX it with this. I don't generally recommend throwing this as an EX from hand, although you can. It's just that you're throwing a lot of potential value at this because you're throwing away Chilicerata.
Right.
Like, yeah, as your second copy. I would prefer to play this as superior.
That makes
Uh,
sense.
so yeah, Superior Planted is actually quite good, where it's now on curve at 3, where it has a bunch of great properties, above curve at 4. Um, but it's usually going to but yeah, so this is kind of your one offensive special. Is this attack does a bunch of dangerous things,
Right.
and if
And
they yeah, go ahead.
even then, though, it's an offensive special because it sets up your next strike, not because it's backbreaking this strike.
Yes, correct, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
It is offensive specifically because it lets you play a web trap to gain advantage, and then hopefully do a backbreaker next turn.
Okay.
The worst outcome here, if you aren't stunned, is you gained advantage anyway, right? You want to still play a web trap just to gain advantage, and then now it's your turn and you can do something else.
Right. Right.
Um, Even if you're not in a situation where you want to do this, right? Like a range 5 web trap is not very good most of the time. So it's probably better to have this closer to you where you can do shenanigans with it later on.
Right. I think
Uh,
we're probably going to get into this in a second, but before we do, or before we move on from this, now that we're talking about placing web
mhm.
traps from hand, do I have a preference about which ultra I'm placing as a web trap? Is there one that I'm actually going to be using as an attack?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Um, so yeah, let's look at these two ultras. I just had the one out as an example of a web trap, so we haven't actually talked
Sure.
about the ultras. Um, the stats on this are comically bad, right? This is a 1-3-4.
Right.
It, it's very very good that the stats are comically bad, because if they were any better, Byakuya would be completely insane.
Okay.
Um, because what this card naturally does is chain into itself.
Right.
Um, where you stun them, you place this as a trap boost, you gain advantage. Now you use your ability with something else, and if you have the other copy, well, now you have a speed 6, power 5, ignore guard.
Right.
If they didn't play exactly a speed 7, right, or higher, I should say,
Right.
then you stun them, you gain advantage, you put it in their space again, use your ability again, they die. Like
Right.
that's what this kind of naturally does. So it's a very very good thing that it's not a higher printed speed, because then you would have an on curve natural combo that just murders people.
Right.
Um, so I mostly use this as a defensive mid speed, as a thing that says, oh, you I don't have a Soul's Oath in play, which means that obviously they can play sweep and focus safely at range 1, right?
They've finally been they've
Well,
the thing that they've been dreaming of this whole game. They can finally do it. All right. Well, now I have to pay 2 gauge to stop you instead.
yes.
Gotcha.
Um, which Yeah, well, I'll talk about gauge economy as well in a minute. But yeah,
Yep.
so that's the value of this attack. If you're playing against a character who is not going to be hanging out range 1 if they can help it, then yeah, throw this card away. Like you can play this web trap as a boost and not worry about the attack, because they're not likely to want to be at range 1 trading blows, and neither are you. You can probably beat them at range anyway, because you can play a range 1 to 4 sweep and a range 1 to 4 spike and such.
Yep.
Uh, like you have some good things. But yeah, so this is but this is another solid answer tool, another solid defensive tool. You can initiate with it. This has the same problem as some of the other stuff that I mentioned before, where initiating and losing is so incredibly crushingly bad that I would prefer to just hold this as a defensive button,
Sure.
even though it gains advantage, which is certainly nice. Um, this is 4 gauge. That's a real cost.
Yeah.
A lot of season 6, a lot of Under Night characters generate gauge very very freely. Um, or relatively easily, depending on the character. Some like hide really really freely. Some like Waldstein kind of scrape for it, but also yeah, they get immense value out of it.
Right.
Um, what you are spending gauge on is the change cards action in these cards. Like your gauge is force, or it's paying for these,
Right.
and this is really expensive. Um, like you're playing the ultra from hand and 4 gauge, so 6 total force. Uh, it does not by itself gain advantage. And that's the worst part about it, is that what you want to do is the same thing you do with this, where you play it, you hit, you have advantage, you do something else. But the only way for this to actually trigger like that is for you to already have a web trap in play, so that you gain
Right.
advantage off the web trap.
Right.
Um, and that requires enough setup that you would probably rather just play a sweep and not spend 4 gauge to hit for 6. Um, but yeah, so I do find Becoming Part of Me useful. I find it's usually you're not gonna be willing to spend the 4 gauge on it. Um, that said, it's a godlike EX attack. Um,
Okay.
this is a range 3, speed 6, power 7. Um, cool. That wins the strike. At range
Yeah,
2, I guess you trade with focus, but other than that, it's amazing. And if you aren't trading with focus, then you are putting a trap in play, which even if you don't have the next turn, is really good. But hopefully, this as an EX, you are playing defensively to stun them on defense, and then you have a web trap, and now you initiate with your ability.
right.
So if you play this, you play at EX, you will probably know if you are going to have the gauge to afford that. Um, like by the time you are deciding whether or not you can throw this away. If it's very, very early game, just boost it. Like just use it however you need to use it. Don't hold this attack forever.
Gotcha.
But
And the other thing that you would be spending the gauge on, other than maybe Endless Nightmare, is changing cards.
yeah, generally, yeah. I
Okay,
mean, sometimes
makes sense.
walking, but you have enough movement on your stuff that you probably aren't going to be taking the walk action all that much.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
mhm. Yeah, so this
Uh,
this attack is potentially devastating, especially when used as a reversal. Like this EX because of this after means you respond, you win the next strike. They're probably dead because of how much damage they took.
right.
But it has the cost that you would expect with that. It is you're throwing an EX 4 gauge ultra, and you're relying on them not having done a setup in advance to cover it.
Right.
But it does mean that your opponent can lose the game from 12 life, where you say, "Oh, take 7, and now I'll play my speed 5 spike and take 5 or 7 more." Oh, excuse
Seven
me, that's
more. Yeah.
14 life.
Yeah. Even
Yeah,
14. Yeah.
yeah. Like they can die much faster than they think if you manage to be able to afford this and habits, and they're hanging out at range 3 enough to make this viable, or
Right.
4 if you have Soul's Oath, because of course Soul's Oath.
Yeah. Soul's Oath can
Uh,
set up almost everything.
yep. The other times that I have used this attack are way more niche, but I will note this just as a funny thing that you can do. Usually not going to be worth 4 gauge. You can play this when it misses and get this after effect.
Right.
Right. That means that if your opponent is playing an attack that is completely unbeatable by any means, like inevitability, which is before close 8s, right? Um, you play
You just
this, it becomes a trap, they stop.
they stop. Right.
Cool. It's over now. Right. So, and I have done things like that, where I've just said, okay, at speed 5, I'm putting this here so that your speed 3 or 4 thing doesn't get to hit me.
Right.
But yeah, usually if I'm playing this, I want to be playing at EX. I want to be destroying somebody with it in their entirety by following up with my ability.
Okay.
But most of the time, I'm not. Most of the time, I find that I have already needed to use the web trap earlier in the game, and or I already needed to spin the force for change cards. I didn't get here.
Okay. So
It's a cool finish for that.
if it becomes so I guess to come back to my question about which one you would prefer to spend, like it sounds like slightly Endless Nightmare, but as soon as you've spent one copy of Become a Part of Me, uh, that advantage sort of disappears because you're good with whatever you're doing at that point because all you really want is the web traps.
I would say that's mostly accurate. I would say in matchups where your opponent, like where the opponent has range 1 stuff that is slower than this, you're playing against Tager, Potemkin,
Right.
right? You're playing against somebody with extra sweeps, extra focuses, then you want this more, and so you're much more willing to spin this one,
Okay.
uh, or to use it as a web trap, I should say, boost it.
That
Sorry,
makes
boost.
sense.
Um, but yeah, this attack is very very good for at deleting the opponent from surprisingly high life totals because of how it chains into your ability.
Right.
But it's also extremely expensive to do that, and you will probably have to have already drawn through your deck. Which, if you manage to do that without spinning gauge on change cards, you've done very well.
Right. Sure.
Um,
And that's what's competing as a resource for this ultra. So that makes sense.
yep, that
Okay.
or the other one, but yeah.
I'm noticing, by the way, as we're talking about all of the various gauge payouts you have, like there is a back of this card that might involve that might be, oh, never mind, I'm reading it. Maybe not.
We'll talk about this. We'll talk about
Okay.
this. Yeah, it is only fair. I've talked about what your gauge is used for, and I completely omitted your exceed action,
Right.
which is certainly, yeah, should raise eyebrows, right? Like,
Yeah.
this is a game called Exceed. You have an Exceed ability. You should probably know what it is, and we should probably figure out how it works. So, as an Undernight character, you have this boost, which you should not play,
Okay.
because this costs you a focus. It's not worth it. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like that's true of most Undernight characters, but it's definitely true of Byakuya. Focus is too good an attack.
Right.
Um, so yeah, you want your focus. don't play Veil off. But if you were to play it, you would get to exceed at a cost of -1 gauge, which is a pretty good cost to exceed.
Sure.
Right.
It
So
it goes to gauge. You didn't spend any gauge. You exceeded for free. Sure.
yeah, it's pretty good cost for that. So let's see what we get for that. Well, immediately we get nothing because you have to have 2 gauge to use this action.
Right.
So you're not just veil offing into your other mode where you're somebody like, I don't know, Nanase, who is then going to be doing this action for the rest of the game.
Right.
You actually need to have built up some resources in order to start to do this more than once.
Right.
Also, what this actually does, so what this does is, as an action, you pay 2 gauge and then draw 2. Then you may strike with an EX attack. And if you do, then you have +1 power. If you don't, right, implicitly, explicitly, sorry, it's on there. I didn't realize. Anyway, if you don't strike with an EX attack, then your turn ends. So you'll draw for a turn, and then you'll have to discard if relevant.
Right.
So, you might notice that you paid 2 gauge to draw 2 cards and end your turn if you don't have an EX to strike with. That's
Right.
change cards action.
Yes.
Like that's what we just did. So the question then is, having said that it's not worth spending focus to exceed, is it worth spending a gauge and a turn to be in exceed mode in order to start to be able to do this? Well, it would only be worth it if you were reliably striking with the X's and if this +1 power meant that it's better than having access. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. I shouldn't say it that way. It's better than having the force in the turn that I spent.
Right.
I was about to say access to the run side. That's actually not true though, because you always have access to your front side.
You could revert and immediately use your ability by taking another action.
Right. Being in
Right.
exceed mode is I can be back in basic mode anytime I want because this action here,
Right.
just throw a card from hand in a gauge, flip back, and now I still have this. So you don't not have access to your front side. What you did lose was the turn and the force / gauge that you spent to flip,
Right.
and that may be a real cost. So how good does this benefit? All right. Well, I believe I have played, in my recollection, 3 games in which I was pretty sure it was correct to exceed as Byakuya and use this ability. In the first of them, I had a 7-card hands. It included 2 of his 4-copy specials. That is to say, one of, I don't remember which ones, but one each of 2 of the or shredded, how shall I cook you, minced. I said those in the wrong order. You get the idea.
Yep.
All right. So I then paid 2 gauge to draw 2 cards, giving me a 9-card hands, and 2 of those had 2 or more copies left in the deck because they were 4 ofs, and I had not seen all of them. I then had to draw for end of turn because I was not holding any X's.
Even though you had all of the
Yep.
ingredients to make
Yep.
almost every other EX attack.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Because screw the odds.
Yep.
It shook out that way.
Well, and you have a larger than normal, like you have 36 cards in your deck. So
Yep.
you might not be getting.
You will struggle to draw EXs that aren't these.
Right.
Hypothetically, these are the ones that you would favor. Are the 3 that have 4 ofs.
Sure.
All right. So let's now actually follow that logic and say, well, if you were drawing these, never mind my saltiness, right?
Right.
If you were drawing these, how important is +1 power? Well, it turns this from 5 to, or I'll do this in order. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
I'll talk about that attack later. But
this is Soul's Oath anyway.
Yeah. Turns it from 4 to 5. This does not. This is technically a breakpoint. It's usually a trivial one.
Right.
It's not very impactful, and this goes from 5 to 6, which is not actually a significant breakpoint.
Right.
So yeah, this +1 power did not do very much for any of these. We know because these are our highest power specials that it did not do anything for any other specials.
Right. And we're more likely to have these EX attacks anyway.
Yep. And if we were to worry about normals, then we would say that the one that matters is sweet.
Right.
Like that's the one where the EX goes
plus
up a
one
big
power
number.
matters quite a bit on sweep because it stuns counter sweeps.
Yes. Well, no, sorry, it stuns focus. Keep in mind, this is an EX attack.
Oh, sure. It's already EX sweep, and then on top of that, you have plus 1 power.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It also can matter for EX dive because EX dive now becomes 7 power, which stuns a sweep if you're at range 4 or whatnot.
Right.
So we've seen kind of like, okay, there's essentially 2 cases where this is going to matter for a breakpoint. There might be a handful of other niche cases depending on what the opponent's card values are like, right? but that power is not super valuable. Now, I have talked
Right.
a lot about how you love drawing cards, so it seems like it should be great to be able to draw two and strike. But that's only if you are relying on any kind of offensive momentum, which, in my opinion, you do not. You are a defensive character.
You're a defensive
Like
character. Okay. Sure.
you're playing the control game. You want to have setups where you win on defense and then initiate on your terms. And this tends to be super awkward because this tends to mean unless you already had it in your hands, you are not controlling what you're striking with. Um, and because you're playing an EX attack, you're also not actually going to build you're not big hand Byakuya, right? You're
Right.
not going to go over your hand size and then maintain it because you are drawing two and then placing two. Um, so you're not accumulating any kind of ongoing advantage by doing that.
Right.
Um, Now, I will say, the other two games, in the first of them, the reason that I considered it reasonable was because I exceeded, and then I played this,
I was actually
and
about
then
to
my
ask
opponent,
that
yes,
that interaction. Yeah, that counts.
and then my opponent passed the turn, and I had one turn on which I was actually able to use his exceed ability. So in all my games of Byakuya, that's the one turn that I have found his exceed ability to be a good decision, is that you manage to have this in play, the opponent lets you have the turn back without doing anything about it,
Right.
and you were already in exceed mode. Um, and in that case, you get to play any EX you want with an extra +1, which still does not do very much for your breakpoints.
Right.
I'm not really impressed by this.
Yeah. Sure. No. And
um,
it
yeah,
mostly, it sounds like mostly because of the like you need a specific combination of factors, but also like the tempo loss means that
you,
you need to plan for having those combinations of factors beforehand.
yeah, you either spent a turn and a gauge, or you sacrifice to focus to
Right.
say, I believe that this is worth doing. The other reason you might consider doing it if you veil off is that you really believe you value gauge, but I do not believe you value gauge highly enough to sacrifice focus.
Yep.
Um, to make it clear, by the way, that's like just an undernight play in general, is to go, I veil off, and the next turn I revert, and now I have two gauge.
Yep. Now you have two
Uh,
gauge, and you can
and
threaten
it's still my
uh,
turn. Yeah.
endless
But yeah,
nightmare, for example.
yeah. And like that's certainly a reasonable thing that undernight characters do. The problem is that it costs you focus, which is usually one of the best cards in your kit, and this is no exception.
Right.
Like focus has a trading value of 6, the delta as we like to call it,
Right.
far better than any of your specials.
Right. Okay.
Um, but yeah, so I have generally found his exceed mode is not worth it. It's unreliable. If you manage to have it set up in advance, then it still was so costly that I'm not convinced you wouldn't have been better off just continuing
Just
to play it on this side.
right, and
Um,
maintaining tempo,
yeah,
not taking a turn
yeah,
off.
not taking the turn, not spending gauge / focus, depending on which one you spent on it.
Right.
Um, it's that cost is the reason that I don't recommend exceeding as Byakuya. Like that,
Sure.
because you can always revert, but you know, why was it worth flipping? Was it worth having the gauge? Well, only if you actually needed to hit a breakpoint specifically to threaten this at this exact point in time. I'm sure
Right.
there's cases where that will matter. I'm sure there's cases where you must have two gauge right now, or the opponent will kill you. Um,
But you'll
but
probably know when
yeah,
when those times are.
yeah. Like if that is happening and you didn't have the chance to get the gauge beforehand, yeah, you might be dead already. And then
Right.
if it's happening and you have an opportunity to get the gauge, then you probably have a lot of ways to do it. But feel free to do what you must, do what you have
Right.
to.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, that's my take on Legacy Node, and it's why I don't. Well, that and Lingering Salt are the reasons I don't value it. I
Right.
still have not forgiven Byakuya for that
That
first
one
time that I
time
used it.
when you CC'd and didn't get anything you needed.
Yep, seven card hands, 9 card hands, no EXs.
Not enough. Yep.
And I've not forgiven him for that. Um, but even apart from that, I have found it very rarely justifiable. Like I said,
Right.
even apart from that, only 2 other games have I had where it actually seemed like it was probably going to be a good idea, and only in one of them did I actually get a chance to use it.
And you used
Um,
it one time.
well, no, I didn't because I was salty, but I had
Oh,
the
okay.
chance to use it.
You could have used it. You could have used it one time.
I could have used it one time,
Yeah.
and I should have
Ringing
used it one time, if I'm honest.
ringing endorsement from D here. You
Yeah.
compare that to how many times per game across dozens of games have you changed cards?
Well, as I said,
With
I think it's the action I've taken the most often as Byakuya,
right.
or at least the action I've taken most often per game on average as Byakuya.
Right.
So,
So
8 to 12 times at least.
if we're looking for gauge payouts, it seems like just by use case, one of them has more representation than his exceed side does.
I would say so. Now, of course,
Okay.
I don't actually always change cards from Gauge, but I will often include Gauge in my change cards actions.
Sure.
It depends mostly on how strong my hand is, because if I, it's never worth changing cards just one card unless you have shenanigans, and
Right.
you don't have that kind of shenanigans.
Right.
So generally, you're going to change cards 2 or more. It's usually most worthwhile to do it at 3 or more, just efficiency and all that. And if you start looking at your discarding stuff for in a turn, you're probably going to be more inclined to pitch stuff from hands because you're going to have to discard things anyway. You should winnow things down if you can. The situation in which you spend Gauge to change cards is mostly the situation in which you have half of multiple promising EXs in hand, and you don't want to throw away any of them.
Right.
Where you go, okay, I have a minced, right? I have, maybe an assault, maybe I have one of these, and I go, okay, these are all cards that individually I wouldn't actually really have maybe this one. I wouldn't have a problem throwing away one copy of these, but I
Right.
really want to have the EXs right now. Maybe we're playing
Right.
a bunch at ranges 1 to 3 or whatnot. So then I'm going to hold these, use my Gauge, overdraw, and that's what we call filtering, right? Is you draw too many cards and then you discard down, and it was actually good to do this because you
Right.
filtered out the bad stuff, you filtered in the good stuff, depending on your
You
perspective.
you've gone deeper into your deck than you would have if you had respected hand size.
Right. And if you had pitched these, and then you draw the second copy of them, you go,
In,
oh, well.
Inevitably, you would have drawn another copy of Mints in your other assault and not your other copy of I'll plant it somewhere over here.
Yes, yeah, they'll
Yeah,
float to the top of your deck when you right after you give out the first copy of whatever EX you wanted.
exactly. Yeah, everyone has had this happen to them, and they know. Okay, that makes sense. So you're pulling from Gauge in order to preserve options like this, or
Mhm.
other really important things you don't want to give up.
Yeah, because you have a suite of defensive tools, and you go, yeah, I care a lot about my defensive tools. They're also relatively specific. I want to make sure I maintain those defenses and I keep my the strands of my web alive.
Right. Sure.
This does mean that like this is trash. Not like it's bad. It's just it's fodder.
Yeah.
This you can totally throw as force onto any change cards action if you want to change cards more aggressively than just this little draw an extra card boost.
Draw one. Right.
Uh,
So yes, I mean sometimes you need trash.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
valuable to have that. So like,
Right.
and then some of these, not usually all of them, where you're going, yeah, because these are good for boosts. The boost draws you, a card. The boost turns your move into a prep, or it turns your power into a prep because you're drawing
Right.
one more card than just ending turn.
Right.
But if you have, nothing else to throw away, then yeah, you can draw more cards faster by changing cards with those and something else.
Right. And you're not necessarily giving up the EX attack because you have another copy of
Yes.
them. Okay.
hmm Yeah,
Gotcha.
and
Gotcha.
that's the really notable thing about these.
Right.
It is even perfectly legal to spend some of these, but I will mostly not throw Soul's Oath as force for change
Sure.
cards. Much as I love changing cards, I mostly am going to consider throwing one or more of these, but not the last one I have in hands.
Right.
Um,
So that you can always set up a web if you need to, and you're hoping
yes.
to set up a web to start your offense. Right.
Like if I need to preserve my defense, or if I manage to get my offense, which does not necessarily require this. This is just kind of his canonical,
Right.
like, offensive nonsense starter. But
His
there's plenty
combo
of
starter. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's plenty of cases where just having these for the defensive utility means that you can aggress more comfortably with various things because your opponent puts himself in an awkward position if they try to position around whatever other stuff you want to play.
Right. Okay.
But yeah, so generally, I'm willing to spend occasional ultras. I'm very willing to throw these, and some normals that I don't respect.
Right.
I mentioned this one already, right? Like you have another speed 7, so grasp is often a card you can use as a boost or as force. Like
Now
all
now
good stuff to throw away.
these might be normals that you don't respect, but obviously Grasp
Oh,
respects
it
you.
says respect on it.
Yeah, it says it right
Dang.
on there. So
Oh, you're
don't
right.
disrespect the respect.
Yeah. Well, then I won't use. Well, I've lost it now. Where is it? He has disrespect. It's on. Ah, there it is. Caught you.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So
Yeah.
but you probably shouldn't. You were already saying that you shouldn't throw this as force because you need
Yeah.
it as a threat.
You shouldn't
Gotcha.
disrespect your opponent all that often.
Of course.
Um, that's Byakuya advice. Don't disrespect
Right.
very often.
Yeah, because you need to catch them instead.
Yeah, you should respect them more often than you should disrespect them in all likelihood. Um,
Gotcha. Okay, that's good life advice too.
yeah, yeah. Although I will say you're probably not respecting them to get in their face. You're probably
True.
respecting them to get yourself out of the corner.
Out of the corner, sure.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah. This works both literally and metaphorically.
Yep.
Um, okay, so that's things you can throw as force at least to some extent, not necessarily all of everything, but that's just life as a character with a bunch of dedicated defensive tools. Is you value every defensive button you have, and you need to know what it does, and then when you can afford to drop one or both.
Sure. Yeah,
Uh,
that's just exceed. That's not
yeah,
necessarily even Byakuya. That's a lot of characters.
yeah. Although, well, characters with stat boosts tend to be able to say this boost makes half a dozen cards more reliable because
Right.
the boost is half of the value of an attack. Byakuya does not have that luxury.
Right. Okay.
Byakuya is set plays in the hands, right? You're an Undernight character. You probably don't have a lot in the way of stat boost on the board. You care a lot about sculpting your hands. Uh, all right. Unless you have more remarks on that or anything else in particular, I guess I can talk about the stack.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. So this is a hit effect. That's the first thing that people get wrong. This is not a before effect. Despite the fact that it says pull on it, this is not a before effect, meaning this is not a long range attack. This is a range 1
Right.
and 2 attack.
So this is a like a mid speed, a weird kind of
It's a
mid
mid
speedy
speed.
Rekka. Okay.
It is yeah, it's a mid speed Rekka. That's
Okay.
exactly what it is. So on hits, meaning you're at range 1 and 2, you've hit them. Reveal any number of cards with the same name from your hand. That means the same name as each other, not this card.
Whoa. Oh. So you
Yes.
could say minced. You could reveal 4 copies of minced.
Yes, you absolutely
Okay.
can. And
All right.
that's the clear intent of this, right? Is you go, all right, I've hit you, and now I'm going to literally play my Rekka, because these 3 cards, I think, if I recall correctly, are his Rekka in under. Sorry, Rekka fighting game term. It's you mash the button. It's a move that repeats as you mash the button. Anyway,
Right. Yeah. And
um,
you can stop it midway through if they're blocking it or something like that. It's a sort of a modular offensive tool.
right. So yeah, you've hit them, and so you mash the button, one of the buttons that is the other part of your Rekka, and continue
Right.
it. Um, And it reveals not discard, so you're not even paying force for the luxury. You just go, yeah, hey, just so you know, I have 4 copies of mints. Um, First problem with this. Well, no, second problem. First problem is it has Soul's Oath on it. Second problem with this is you had to have like that many copies of a thing in your hands.
Right.
So usually this is going to be +1 to 3 or +1 to 2 power, right? Because you can have 2 of anything.
Right.
You can have 1 of anything, right? It says any number. So you can say, all right, here's my 1 block that I have in hands. +1 power, pull 1. Um, Cool. But in the dream scenario of I have 4 copies of minced or shredded, whichever, then I'm hitting for 7 and I'm pulling you 4 times.
Right.
That's great. That's awesome. The problem is that meant that 4 cards in your hands were that 1 card in your hand is this. So 5 cards of your 7 are spoken for. Assuming that you had a full hand of 7, which as a defensive character you often will have a very large hand, 6 or 7
Right.
cards. But
Right.
if you didn't have a full hand, maybe you just revealed your entire hand to your opponents. Revealing your hand to your opponent is bad.
Sure.
This is a thing you generally don't like to do. So if you only have a normal EX reveal, you might be very hesitant to say, I'm going to show you my normals. Do you have reading in your deck, by the way? Maybe I shouldn't do this.
Yeah. Maybe that's not a good idea. And even if they don't, I mean,
Even if they
okay,
don't, just them knowing, like,
yeah. In the
yeah,
dream scenario, you're like, I'm revealing 2 copies of an EX reversal. Don't stand at range 1.
right. And they are at range 1, by the way.
Right, because
Because you pulled
you
them 4
pulled them.
times.
Right.
Yeah. The way, by the way, here's the next thing that people are going to misread about this. This is a historic exceed problem. You know this problem, even if you don't know it. The bug zapper problem.
Oh yes.
Yes, right. So,
From Lucia's kit.
yep,
Yep.
that's where it got the nickname, right? But the what it's also in Dan's kit. Saikyo Hiragoshi does this, where you say, all right, I'm going to reveal 4 copies of minced. So
Yep.
for each card revealed, +1 power, pull 1, 1,
1,
2,
2,
3,
3, 4.
4.
Yeah. Yep.
That is how that works.
Yep. You don't
Um,
continue pulling in the same direction. Each pull is a discrete effect, and it always goes towards you.
Correct.
Gotcha.
It does not say I'm going to pull you 1, 2, 3, 4. That is not how it works. Nope.
Right.
Which means that people often misread what effect this is going to have on board state, even if
Right.
they manage to get as far as understanding that you can reveal 3 of a different card.
Of a different card,
Um,
sure.
yeah. But yes, so the fact that it means that you had a hand that had three or four, like the ideal use case of this, I had 3 or 4 copies of one thing, which is kind of a monolithic hand. It's a hand that is one note. It doesn't have the diversity that I value as a defensive utility controlling character.
Right.
And now my opponent knows that it tends to be a problem.
Right.
So it's a nice payout. I have actually played How Shall I Cook You multiple times. This is because I'm absurdly greedy. And when I have played this, I have played it EX so that it hits 8 power.
Yep. Definitely.
I think that's really funny and very flashy and very cool. I also don't think most of the time that it was correct. It feels pretty good to play on curve 8 power, but it cost me 2 Souls Oaths.
Right.
That's a lot of Souls Oath.
Yeah, I mean that honestly, a lot of what you were saying sounds kind of academic because it like the conversation maybe could have stopped at like this has Soul's Oath, you don't want to get rid of it because it has Soul's Oath. But
yeah, that was the first
but
problem, but I wanted to explain the mechanics of this card because
totally.
it is the jankiest card, like the jankiest
Right.
effect to resolve in the kit is to read this correctly and go,
Right.
oh, I can reveal first a different card. I can reveal only one copy because that's any number.
Yep.
And then the pulls are
The polls
individual.
are consecutive, not cumulative.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Okay.
So I did want to cover that.
You would EX How Shall I Cook You with 4 copies of Minced in your hand when you've like had a really bad day and you want to do something funny and exceed. This is not
I've done it
most of the
because I can't
time.
resist it. It's not
Yeah.
usually a good idea.
Right.
Because what you're doing is you're committing a ton to winning 1 strike by 8 instead of 2 strikes by like 3 to 6.
Right.
If you only win them for 3 each, then okay, I guess that wasn't worth it. So your job is to do better than that.
Right. But Soul's Oath also has, defensive utility that will prevent an opponent from striking into you. That has kind of like
Yes.
an intangible value, or
Yeah.
at least a more difficult to define value. So most of the time, almost all of the time, Soul's Oath is going to be the play.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep. That would be my opinion of that.
Okay.
Yep. And
Um.
having 4 copies also means that it's gonna, as mentioned previously, right? They can only tech 2 of them, and if they
Yep.
have parry in their kit, they can only parry 2 of them. They might well
Right.
tech 2, parry 2. Okay, that's all their techs and all their parries. At least there's
Yep.
that.
Yep. Yeah. So like, and they're spending a lot of resources just to keep this one card down.
Yes.
Okay.
So you get to have the rest of your suite of tools available to
Right.
you.
So
Admittedly, if that happens, it still sucks. And honestly, I would consider like
reshuffling
throw a
for
bunch
it.
of like get a bunch
Yeah.
of normals out so that you have gotten the value out of them and then reshuffle. Because you
Right.
don't want to reshuffle before you've actually played the cards that deal damage.
Right. Sure.
Um, but once you've played both sweeps and all 4 of these are down, it's a pretty good time to look at reshuffling.
Right. So and probably don't do the job of parrying or teching this boost by playing it as an attack if you can help it.
Yes, yeah, don't parry it for your opponents by just discarding it yourself.
By taking it out of your hand as an attack.
Yeah,
Okay.
not generally. It is I think usually not a good idea. It's probably a mistake.
That makes sense. So at this point, I kind of like the synergy of having ended where we started, having started with Soul's Oath and then ended on How Shall I Cook You. Are there other
Mhm.
considerations about Byakuya that we want to go into, or is this a good place to
I
end
think this is
the
where
discussion of the kit?
I think this is where the kit discussion ends.
Okay,
I
perfect.
that's the last thing that I wanted to say about the kit, at least.
Perfect. So then, as always, the final thing that we tend to talk about is you've just described some very complicated and very tricky Byakuya play, and these are all the things that my extremely competent opponent, who has labbed the Byakuya matchup, knows about and is ready to deal with. What are they doing to stop Byakuya, and what is Byakuya? How is he modifying his play to deal with that counterplay?
Mhm. Counterplay and counterplay.
Yes.
All right. So, um, this is gonna get here's the short of it. Byakuya wants to make you afraid to do a bunch of things. He wants to make it impossible for you to do things safely.
Right.
He actually can make it impossible for you to do things safely if you're most characters. He can
Right.
say, now you don't have any safe plays. However, he does not decide whether or not you're afraid. You do.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. He can decide whether it's safe or not, but you can decide whether or not you're afraid of that.
yes, and that matters a lot for things like Caught You or the threat of CXs, where if you have decided that you can never initiate into him at range 1 because he could have a speed 8,
Right.
then you're helping him win.
Right.
Right? If you only ever play a thing that's safe against EX Minced, you go, okay, I'm going to only initiate with sweep at range 1. Then sooner or later, he's going to dive over your sweep. He's going to continue his defensive setup, and you will not be able to come back from it. You'll be sad.
Right.
So generally my advice is play kind of fearlessly, because Byakuya is like has to deal with the very big drawback of he has a big deck and he needs to draw through it. Like he is going to struggle to see all the damage he needs to kill you and all the cards he needs to defend against you very quickly. Um, you can probably rush him down. Even if you are another kind of defensive character, you can probably come at him, like get in his face faster than he's comfortable with by a good margin.
He's even
Uh,
more defensive than you are most of the time.
most of the time, yeah. Like
Okay.
he's doing these setups to say I'm buying time to draw through my deck to buy the things that will kill, or to draw the things that will kill you.
Right.
So don't attack me, please. Um, Dealing with Soul's Oath is hard. Legitimately, my first suggestion is, yeah, tech 2 copies of it.
Right.
Like, either tech or tech hit, depending on which season you're from, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Never dive/block Byakuya
yes,
if you can help it, depending on the season you're in.
whichever card you have has the thing that says discard a boost from play on it. That's the thing that is 2 copies of Soul's Oath, go away.
Right.
Because that makes your life way, way easier to be able to do that. And also, the value of those attacks, dive and block, against him is not that high.
Right.
Like blocking his stuff is, if it's safe to begin with, it's usually blocking a 3 power attack.
Right. Which is probably the lowest value you could get for your block.
Yep. And then diving him is often a problem because of how he manipulates the board state and positioning. Like it's usually
Right.
hard to catch him with a dive that is reliable. He's going to do something to slip out of it.
Right.
Which is, yeah, pretty annoying for you. So depending on which card it's on, yeah, tech or tech hit gets you 2 copies of Soul's Oath. The other two, what you generally want to try to do with Byakuya is quote unquote force him to sustain it. Right. The reason I put you in this position here is because this is your favorite position against Byakuya, is that he's cornered at range 1.
He can't back up, so that cuts off one thing that Soul's Oath can do.
Right. Like this means that you play a focus and he can get out of it, but it sucks. You play a grasp or an EX grasp and he can beat it, but it's a hassle.
Right.
You play a sweep, and yeah, sweep is a little bit less safe though. But anyway, generally you want to get him up against the wall to limit the value of Soul's Oath. It's actually also like okay to be here. This is annoying because he will happily cross out from here, but if you're a character that is good at range, then him crossing out is not necessarily good for him.
Right.
Oh yeah, I should also mention that if you have good projectiles, that is to say, if you have speed 5 or higher projectiles, then you can initiate into him at range 4 or greater pretty reliably. Because
Okay.
the thing that he can do against you at range 4 is play sweep and seal a Soul's Oath.
And now you've gotten a Soul's Oath out.
Yeah, you got a Soul's Oath off. You have hit him. You've done some damage. He is trading, right?
Right.
You were going to trade with sweep probably. What he wants to do is he wants to trade with sweep favorably, and he wants to get clean wins with spike, which is what everyone wants to do. But he's
Sure.
unusually able to do it in situations where other people can't. And so you go, okay, I'm going to trade against sweep. If it also costs him a Soul's Oath, that's actually good for me.
Right.
If I can trade with spike by playing something that then he has to push me out and hit, play assault, for example, right? Then that's also good. But yeah, like you will probably lose 2 strikes that had Soul's Oath on them, and that's fine. What you don't want to have happen is you never get. Let me phrase that differently. Deal for you is that you play things that are so troublesome for him to deal with that he's not going to get a better thing by playing Soul's Oath. Or by stealing Soul's Oath, right?
Right.
Projectiles are great at doing this.
Make him sustain it. I see.
Yeah, like pressure him into sustaining it, where he goes, okay, I guess I can seal it, but it doesn't actually change much on my ends. This often means initiating at range 1. This often means initiating on curve at mid range, or like range 2 cross or whatever. Where okay, he may well play this, but if he does, he sealed it to hit you for 4.
Right.
Look carefully at those number values of how much value does he get out of it if he is sealing it versus how much is he getting if he spends it. Because 5 life is about the threshold for he's willing to seal this to deal 5 damage. He's going to be reluctant to seal it to deal less than 5 damage.
Right.
If he does less than 5 damage, then he might sustain it. which means that you are trading one less bad or hitting for one more effective over time.
Right. You do that twice, and now you're starting to make up some ground that Solzoth would otherwise be
Yeah.
gaining on you. Okay.
Yeah, like that's the point at which the Byakuya player is going to start going, oh, I don't want to sustain this forever. I'm having a trouble dealing with you. And I'll talk about a couple other things about that as well. But
Right.
therefore, I will let one copy drop and then play the other from hands. And then you go, okay, that's a copy down,
That's
two
one
copies
down.
stacked. This is the fourth one, probably.
Yeah.
Depending on where we are in the deck.
Right. Okay.
And he will reshuffle at some point, but the more you pressure him, the harder it is for him to spend turns just drawing. Like
Right.
the more you go into him offensively, the more he has to spend turns playing his defensive setups instead of using the time that he buys with those setups to draw cards.
Right. Okay.
By the way, the things that you like to do, these are going to be more matchup specific than a lot of other characters to counterplay tools. Unless you're season 1 through 5, like that's every character in season 1 through 5 has this boost called Defend, which gives you 1 armor and 3 guard, which is another way of saying that Byakuya does not stun you.
Right. For almost anything he's doing out of his kit. Right.
Yeah, like he can play normals. Otherwise, no. Like the
Right.
only thing that stuns you is the there it is, the EX this.
Right.
Which is attainable, but yeah. So like you like to defend, you also like stat boosts in general, right? Byakuya can't defensively deal with stat boosts very well. If you have a stat boost and he wants to deal with it, the default way is to tech hit, which requires him to initiate, which
Right.
puts him in an awkward position.
And
Like this is
he'd
actually a
prefer not
drawback
to
for
do
him.
that. Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, like tech hit is generally like at baseline an upgrade over tech. But for Byakuya, it's awkward because he
Right.
wants to spend his turns drawing cards, spend your turns winning strikes.
Right. Right. Okay.
And yeah, that puts him in an awkward position. So yeah, the more stat boosts you have, especially guard and speed. Well, no, speed's not that reliable, but especially guard. The better. Like the more you can pressure him in that way. And then otherwise, just being in his face and not worrying too much about things. You do want to not commit to expensive stuff that can just flop. It's like we got Ryu on the board. Ryu has a 3 gauge ultra that does 7 damage, but it's 5 speed.
Right.
That's
And
faster
it
than
has
4.
it has an okay range band, but not so much that you couldn't get out of it with Soul's Oath, or you
Yeah.
couldn't catch him with Caught You.
Yeah, like he stands here and you play a thing that would be guaranteed to hit anyone else, and he seals Soul's Oath to advance, and you
To
spend 3
move in
gauge.
one,
Yeah,
or
like
if you've got a web trap on the board, you have up to 2 points of 2 spaces of movement. You can probably make
yeah.
something
If he does
happen
this,
there.
then he can play grasp and say, okay, I hit
Right.
you,
Right.
and now you're stuns and outs, and he actually got way more value out of that because you played an ultra. So committing
Right.
to expensive stuff is very dangerous. But that's that's kind of life against Byakuya. You generally play a lot of low value things, and they're better than most of his things anyway because his
Right.
card quality is just not very high.
Sure.
And then when he commits an answer, if he commits his last answer of any given type, so be watching for a second copy of this drops, or there are 3 copies of these or this or this down, so he can't EX them.
You can't EX them, sure.
Yep. Or like he had to win a strike with Soul's Oath, and now he didn't have the other one to play because he hasn't drawn it because I've been striking into him a bunch.
Right.
Then now I have this window where I can finally do something.
Right, sure.
But yeah, your committal plays are going to be hard to use against a defensive utility character, especially one who, because his set play is in the hand, because he is building up a hand of defensive tools instead of a board of them most of the time.
Right.
It's a pain because you can't just diffuse that stuff. You can't parry his entire hand away. You go, okay, I'll deal with some of the things that are on the board. And then the other stuff I'm going to have to just throw myself at him pretty consistently, or outstat him if you are a defensive character yourself.
Right. Just to keep him from letting him run his card draw engine until he gets what he needs to kill you.
Right.
Gotcha.
Generally be
so,
aware of. Sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say. So then, as Byakuya, I need to do that as efficiently as I can. Keep my card draw engine going to get my answers or my threats. But I also need to, not waste my Soul's Oaths, not waste my important defensive options, and not crumble to my opponent's aggression. By maintaining some good defensive options.
Right, and that's
Okay.
the thing that I alluded to much earlier as like the height of Byakuya skill is figuring out how to win without using these options, is how
Without
to preserve
Soul's
things.
right.
And
Right.
that tends to turn into janky plays. So in a situation like this, without Soul's Oath on board, like suppose Byakuya put this here and you backed off, right?
Right.
This is a situation where Byakuya like can play a spike that will almost certainly hit unless you exactly cross out, because if you
Right.
play a will push you out and then you miss and he hits. Note that, by the way, this interrupts. So if you are here and you play assault, you close 2, he pushes 1, you miss.
Oh, okay.
Um, like it happens before you are checking range. So
Before your hit effect happens, before any damage is done.
well, I'm talking about the like this, not the hit effect, but the this effect.
Right, yeah.
Um,
So when he moves in, before you actually if you assault in like before assault
before
actually
checking
hits
range.
anything
Yeah.
before, okay, I see.
Your before effect is interrupted. It's you close 2, and then oops,
Gotcha.
this happens. And then if you
Gotcha.
had other before effects, you would do those. But um, so that can be an issue. But yeah, so because of that, this is a situation where at baseline, Spike looks like a good play. In reality,
Right.
Byakuya probably does not want to play Spike here because he wants to use Spike to get the most value out of Soul's Oath. Like
Right.
Soul's Oath wants to turn things into more value than they normally would be, which means this is an acceptable position to play a thing that like normally would be risky, because you know that he's trying to reserve things for where they're going to make the most impact. Basically, we get into a weird corner of the mix-up. Like that's this is the point. This is the point of counter and counterplay where it or counter and counterplay. There we go. That introduces the aspect of the mix-up where Byakuya isn't playing all the good stuff that I've described. He's playing the thing that beats the things that are resilient against the good stuff. And
Right.
then
So now
yeah,
we're on a couple of Yomi layers deep. I'm thinking as Ryu, he's not going to play the spike because he wants to save that for Soul's Oath. It
mhm,
my um sweeps and focuses are better than they would be otherwise.
yep.
Okay.
There is one other thing I will note. If you are particularly fearless, which I think you usually should be, you can stand on this and let him initiate with his ability. But you have to be very sure that you're going to play the correct answer between block or cross.
Okay.
Um, because you can cross out against his +2 speed sweep.
Right.
Uh, you can block just about anything else. And it's annoying, but you know what? The web trap is gone.
Right.
Like it is acceptable to do those things. This is actually one of the kind of the best things to block is this +2 power, +2 speed strike effect. So if you have block, feel free to use it on that.
Right.
Um, because he had to throw some stuff away to get there, and he's not going to be happy about that.
Right.
If you're not
And
at range 1, if you're at range 2 or 3, don't do that.
okay.
Um, because at this point, in all likelihood, unless you have your own weird jank, right? He probably isn't even going to play the on curve spike. He's going to play the EX spike you didn't know he had, which will deal 8 damage, and you can't even cross out of it.
And yeah, and you can't
Right?
get away from it. Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
like if you put yourself in a position at 2 or 3, you're asking to eat a ridiculous payout. At range
Right.
1, this is an acceptable diffusal option where you can
Right.
say, okay, I'm going to play EX focus, I'm going to play block, I'm going to play cross and pray.
But
Um,
then suddenly, when this is in play as well, everything that you just said kind of goes out the window
yeah,
because the setup is now too strong.
yep. Now with both of these, the setup is incredibly dumb, and you get worried. This is
Right.
where at range 2 you go, okay, well, I want to make a play where he has to spend the Soul's Oath on something lower value than he'd be comfortable. So actually, you can
Right.
still play across here. We're now okay. If he didn't play a speed 7 or 8 attack, then you hit him, you run away, and it's way more awkward for him to go after you. And if he did, he had to use Soul's Oath to hit me.
He's at least getting rid of Soul's Oath. Okay.
Yeah, like minimizing the value he can get out of it is what you want to do, because maximizing the value he can get out of it is what he wants to do. Um,
Okay, that makes sense.
like you expect to lose strikes with that Soul's Oath doesn't play on, but try to lose the ones that are going to hit you for 3 or 4 instead of the ones that are going to hit you for 5 or 6.
Yeah. Okay.
And then in the situations where he decides not to cash in, like keep counts of the number of life he spends, and remind yourself that was that you can congratulate yourself on that.
Right. Right. That makes
Like
sense because
that's part of your trade.
you've effectively hit him for that much damage.
Yeah, like
Okay.
if he's not spending it but he is sustaining it, like you may be losing the strikes, but you're probably not losing them as badly as each strike feels if he's
Right.
having to do, or if he's doing that.
Right. That makes sense. Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Questions, comments?
I think that's it. That is he is a character who has a lot of moving parts that I think are going to take some time to digest. So, viewers, listeners, going through
Yeah,
this,
he's
um,
pretty difficult. He's got a lot going on.
yeah, don't expect instantaneous success when you're picking up Byakuya, but he seems like he's got some rewarding things to learn. And
Mhm.
if you haven't taken a look at this guy yet, you might want to, especially as you're getting better at the game and
Mm.
you're looking for new characters.
Yeah. Can I also note something? As a, or I guess I don't have to ask you. I'm taking over the show. I'm going to note
Yeah,
something else here.
absolutely. I can't stop you.
Which is a lot of things I've described are predicated on the idea that with Soul's Oath in play, you can look at the board and know how to manipulate all of the options that both of you have.
Right.
If you don't like automatically look at this and go, oh yeah, I know that I can play my graphs to beat his dive. I can play my assaults to hit his weird projectile or whatever. To
Right.
Hadouken. Yeah, not even that weird. Um,
Sure.
like if you have trouble determining the effects that this before effect, like how this before effect changes the properties and how you can beat anything your opponent plays with individual cards, then you will probably struggle with him. Like
Sure.
that's a kind of fundamental skill, which is just I need to figure out how to append this to every card in my hand and then apply it to every card in my opponent's deck.
And every
Uh,
potential card that your opponent could play. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
lot of information that's going across your brain. Just the overhead of playing Byakuya is a lot.
yeah, it is a lot. I think it is.
Right.
I also think it's actually really really important for playing him because I think he leans so hard on this, and this is only
Right.
actually good if you can do that. Right? If
Right.
you
You
if you
you
what if you think
you
that
need to be able to do this automatically then.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
If you walk away from this and say, okay, the number one takeaway was play Soul's Oath, you're right. But if you play
Right.
Soul's Oath and then you don't know how to use it effectively and you waste it, you will still lose.
Right.
Like it's not
Yeah.
enough to
So
play it; you have to actually know how to use it, and that's non-trivial.
sure. So this can be a level up moment. This is something that I've done after a couple of these lessons where if there was something that I didn't understand, like go grab Byakuya and an opponent's kit and just go into Tabletop Simulator and look at all of their cards and all of your cards and just see how like do the math, run
Hmm.
run the numbers and see how Sozult actually does change things, and that will, even if it doesn't like immediately make you an expert Byakuya player, now you'll start to internalize, you know, normals interactions, and you
Yep.
you might notice things about like, oh, okay, like you could conceivably like learn the speed curve by doing something like this.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that is true. It is a lot like to borrow another character with Sagat. I think Blue was the one who first gave you this advice of how often use his ability more than you probably think you should. And
Yes.
if you're learning him, use it all the time because when it was a bad idea, you will get the feedback of knowing it was a bad idea.
Right.
So it's reasonable to actually go away and say, all right, I'll just play Souls Oath. Well, one copy of Souls Oath. Don't ever stack it. But anyway, I'll make sure I
Right.
have a copy of Souls Oath and play it as often as possible. And when it's wrong, and it doesn't do anything for me, and I start to bleed out because I'm spending life on it all the time,
Right.
figure out why that was.
Yeah.
Use that to train yourself on how to use this boost effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And like if anything, that will, even if you're not super interested in Byakuya, that kind of uh mental exercise bleeds over into other characters.
Mhm. Yeah, that is a fundamental skill. It's
Yeah.
probably the one on which he crutches the most heavily. It's the one that's most important to playing him, but it
Okay.
applies to everybody.
Yeah. Awesome. That makes sense. Well, thank you. So D,
Hey, thanks for being on my show.
absolutely. I was about to ask if I've got somewhere to be. I appreciate you teaching me this character on your show. Where that now next time though, D, I know that you're not going to be around the next time on your show. I'm going to have to run with another expert, so it'll probably be me and somebody else. We'll miss you,
I mean,
D, but
turnabout's fair play. You can take it over just like I took it over, right?
I'll
There's no
steal the
problem
show
with
back from you. Exactly. Perfect.
that.
All right.
All right.
D, thank you so much for your time and your attention. As always, I really appreciate your expertise on this.
Happy to. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and viewer, same to you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something. Go play some Byakuya. I'll see y'all for the next one. Bye, everybody.
Bye.